Alright, hello everyone. This is Samuel, and I wanted to go over today a few of the ideas in the HUD and UI elements for Final Fantasy XIV. The game doesn't really go out of its way to explain a lot of it, and there's a bunch of subtleties, and frankly just a lot of it is hidden behind menus, and it's easy, especially if you're new, to not understand just what you can do with the default HUD. As well as, I'm going to go into some of the more complex areas, things you can accomplish using macros to kind of make your UI a little more interesting, a little cleaner, aesthetically pleasing, however that fits you. So I think I'd start right here at the character login screen. This is a fairly new feature they've added in, I think, patch 4.4, which allows you to save backups of your UI onto the cloud. So you can upload your UI as it is and then download. Say for instance, if you use two separate computers. It's a really helpful feature. I have a work computer that I play on sometimes. It allows me to take UI from one computer and bring it to the other, especially if you make a lot of changes on the regular. So this is a second setting for that. This deals with other things, sound, display, and also your shared macros. If you were like me and have almost every single spot in the macro filled out, it's going to be pretty useful. So let's go ahead and log in. And we'll go over, starting with just the really basic stuff. A lot of you are probably going to already know this, but if you're new, this might be helpful, and we'll get to some of the more advanced stuff as we go along. Alright, so here we are in the goblet. Let's go over, starting at the very basics. Start with the chat box. Chat box can be dragged and made as big and small as you want using the top right corner. The cog at the bottom will take you directly to the chat settings, and this is where you can do things like changing the text size for the prompt. So when you hit enter, how big the actual text is that's right here can be controlled. This also allows you to change the font settings for every single individual pane down here. So let's start with that. Each of these different spots in the chat can be dragged out and made into their own separate chat box. So you can have something, for instance, that has all the notifications in the game. I have one here that exclusively has hunt link shells in it. And you can put those anywhere on the screen you want. You can also move the chat window by grabbing the very bottom left and dragging it where you so see it to be fit. In addition to that, you can make any particular link shell, party chat, any sort of chat you want, have a sound effect that plays whenever somebody types in that particular chat. So link shell 3 and 5 for me are that sound, which you can choose the type of sound right here. You can change it. And those are my hunt link shells, and I don't look at that very often, so this way, if I'm out in the world and somebody lists a hunt, I can hear it with whatever sound I choose without actually having to be over here all the time. Saves a little bit of space, allows you to have a little bit more freedom. Alright. Now let's get into the actual nitty-gritty of the HUD layout. HUD layout here will include just about every single element in your UI that can be changed. You can have up to 4 saved at a time, and you can actually use the cog to copy. So let's say you wanted to have 2 copied into slot 3. You would do it like this, execute, and that would copy. It's a good baseline. These settings right here will determine which of your HUD elements are showing and which you can drag around. So if you click System, all the system pieces will come together. Hotbars will only allow you to select hotbars. Duty elements, such as duty action, will be there. This is really helpful if you have, like, for instance here, I have a bunch of different hotbars and elements all stacked on top of one another. It can be difficult to grab exactly what you need, so you can filter down so you have less things to grab. If you have something like this where you have a lot of things together and you still can't quite get what you want, you can go up here and scroll down to the very specific element you want to move, and then you'll grab it without having to worry about anything else. Okay, so let's start with hotbars. Hotbars, you can change the transparency, like almost everything in the game now. That's a pretty new feature. To have any amount of transparency you want using here. I almost never use it, but it is kind of nice. But just in case you didn't see, you can use this UI cog next to anything to go into the settings. Here you can change the size for everything, anywhere from 200, which is absolutely outrageous, to I usually try to go as small as possible. And you can change the hotbars in particular to have different stylized settings, so you can have different arrangements of the buttons. You have them go vertical, you can do just about anything. I'm going to cancel that because I don't want that change. And this will allow you to go through, we'll go into basic, almost every single part of the UI. There's certain things like the chat bars that are, the chat settings are handled outside of this. But almost everything else you can actually change. You can move it, and with almost every single of the UI settings, or excuse me, of the UI elements, there is specific settings that pertain to that. So let's go with target info, for instance. This is the HP bar I have right here in the middle. Let's go to the status. Go into the settings, you can actually change the size of each particular part of that particular element. So if we go out here again and we go to, let's see, let's try to find the buffs and debuffs. What are they called? Status info. Enhancements for buffs, enfeeblements for debuffs. These can all be together as a single element, and I believe that's how it is by default, or you can split it into 3 separate elements that you can control individually. You can change the way that they're actually formatted, change the size of individual ones, and focus them. This will actually allow you a whole bunch more freedom. You can split out a few things like that. In addition to that, let's go into the character menu while we're on the topic of buffs and debuffs. I believe, I'm trying to find where that particular thing I'm looking for is. Here we go. Under UI settings and HUD, you can actually display, if you want, only to show the debuffs that you have inflicted on a target. When you're in big raids, for instance, there are going to be a lot of people throwing a lot of buffs, a lot of bios, miasmas, and all sorts of stuff on an enemy, on a boss, and it can get to the point where you have a target bar where the entire thing is just rows and rows of debuffs, and it can get pretty confusing. You can change it to where it only affects your detrimental effects that get shown. I like it that way. So I have that checked. Pretty nifty. Let's go back to the HUD layout. A couple other things. When it comes to your gauges, such as blood gauge here for Dark Knight, an option that you may not be familiar with is you can actually switch every gauge to a simple mode. We'll go ahead and save that so you can see what it looks like. So instead of having the very stylish blood bar, you can just have a simple number with, you know, a 0 to 100 and just a basic gauge. If you're not somebody who's into the stylish stuff, you just want something really simple, that can be pretty cool. There's certain ones I actually think look better, like the Monk Chakra bar I actually think looks better as a simple. However, I like the blood gauge. I'll go ahead and bring it back to its normal setting. So, like I said, you can have different HUD elements and you can save them. And you can switch back and forth just by going in here and leaving. And it will switch to whatever HUD element you have chosen. But that's a little bit, that could be a little bit annoying to have to do all the time. So another way you can make that happen is using macros. So for instance, I have this particular HUD setup we're looking at right here. We have a bunch of things up here that are, various cooldowns I like to have available to me. But that's not how I have every single one of my UIs. So if I switch over to a healer, like let's say Scholar, you'll notice I have moved a few things, and I have the party HUD right down in the middle. It's a very specific UI element I've made for healers. Now the way I've done this is using macros. So, as you can see, I have a lot of macros. I'm pretty much obsessed with them. So we're in Scholar right now, and we've made a macro that includes the command HUD layout 4. So in the HUD layout, the number 4 corresponds to that. 4 is what I've set for that particular macro. Let's actually go into that macro in a little more detail, because some of you probably have absolutely no idea what's going on with macros. So what can you do with macros in this game? You can actually do more than you probably would imagine. The reason why I use them is they're just so darn handy, and they're especially handy when it comes to making things in terms of crafting macros. If you have a particular crafting setup you're going to use over and over and over again, they're absolutely fantastic for that, but that's a topic on itself. They're also good for things like emotes, making different menus, which we'll go into later, and things like class changing. So this is our Scholar macro we have currently, named it Scholar. The /m icon stands for macro icon. Scholar, the name SCH for Scholar, class job. That's the command to actually make that into the symbol for Scholar. Gear set change 15. 15 is the number of my Scholar gear set, which we can look at in the character menu. Gear set list, Scholar's right here at 15. Oops, going to the macros. And so there's actually more in here, which we'll get to, but the important thing for what we're talking about is the HUD layout, number 4. So whenever I click that macro button I've made, it switches me to Scholar, or White Mage for this particular button, switches me to Scholar and switches to my HUD number 4. Okay, so we were going to talk about some of the other things going on in that particular class changing macro. So you may notice looking at my screen that I don't have any of my regular skill buttons besides some of these cooldowns here, some of the stuff right here. And you may be wondering where they're at. Well, I have them hidden currently, and I have that macroed to the sheath button, the one that takes out your weapon. When I hit that button, it makes the first 3 hotbars either appear or disappear, hide or show on a toggle. And it also brings up my cross hotbar. Cross hotbar is usually used only for consoles, for having a controller, but there's no reason why you can't actually use them in your UI as a keyboard user if you just need more bars. Still absolutely works fine as a normal button. So let's go into the macros again. Scholar. We have hotbar display 1 off for all of these 3. So that means that the moment I switch to Scholar from anything else, even if I have my buttons showing down here, well, something happened there with my... That's strange. Oh, it's because I'm in the wrong... We apparently at some point switched this while we were messing around. We're gonna get that fixed. Alright, it's not perfect, but we'll fix that later. So, Even if I have all three of these bars set up and showing down here, whenever I switch to Scholar, they are hidden, because that's what the macro tells it to do. And it also has cross hotbar display on, so that's this right here. So how do I get it to show and hide? In my HUD layout, there is a hotbar 10 right up here that is hidden. If you right click on a HUD element, it will either hide or show it. We're going to go ahead and show it now. So I have hotbar 10 hidden because it contains a bunch of commands that I just don't need to be shown all the time, such as limit break, sprinting, my mount. Those are going to always be the same. I don't need to actually change those or have them showing. I always know what hotkeys these are. And right here, I made a macro called Battle Mode, which I have set to keybind mouse 3. So using that button both draws the weapon and has a toggle effect on these. Let me show you that macro. Hotbar display toggle, which goes, it toggles as you can imagine, and it's same thing with a cross hotbar. BM stands for battle mode, which is actually the command for sheathing and unsheathing your weapon. And I have an extra command here at the bottom called macro lock. Macro lock, essentially what it does is it prevents any other macros from overriding this one until this macro is finished. It's not really always necessary, but it just prevents any sort of little issues that happen when you press a couple macros too quickly, because macros are not instantaneous. They are very quick, and they'll go down the list very, very quickly, but it's not instantaneous. And if you have something that would cancel another thing, you want something like macro on, because macros, actually you cannot have two macros going at once. Pressing a macro will always cancel the macro that you have going currently if you press a different one. Okay, so we got these hidden and shown with that particular button. Let's go ahead and hide that HUD element real quick. Okay, so let's look at some other things we got going on here. This bar right here I've added as a sort of, we'll call it an advanced UI. So I have these buttons on here, and each one of these is a macro. So this is a DPS button. It shows all my DPS classes. Tank, healer, crafting and gathering. This includes a bunch of timed buffs I've got set up, potions, raid markers, some emotes I have set up for easy use, and teleport, return, and the wedding ring. So, how did I accomplish this? Well, the way I've done this is actually fairly complicated, because I find that there are not enough hotbars to accomplish what I want to accomplish. So, the maximum you have in the game per the default setup is 10. That's a lot. It's a lot for most people. If you find yourself needing more, there are tricks that you can use to gain more. But we'll get into that in just a moment. Let's open up the macros for a second. As you can see, I have each of those commands set up to a different macro. And you'll see that hotbar display 6 is on. This right here is hotbar 6. The one that is right here that shows all that. So hitting that button will turn that display on, and I have hotbar copy Archer 8 to shared 6. Now what does that mean? You may have noticed that it said Archer and not Bard, because there's something kind of interesting here, which is that once you've unlocked Bard, you're never going to use Archer again unless you're trolling people in Duty Finder. And the way that you change between Bard and Archer is this soul crystal right here. So, interesting thing about those two jobs and classes, whatever you want to call them, is that despite essentially being the same thing, except for Bard's better, they use different hotbars. So if we just go ahead and remove this soul crystal here and go become an archer, you'll notice that I have my own separate set of hotbars that only the archer uses. Well, this is pretty handy because when am I ever going to use archer? The answer is I'm not. These are entirely free to be done with whatever I so choose. So I have hidden a lot of my extra hotbars in archer. So you'll see this is the setup of my DPS, my healers and my tanks, craft and gathering, and actually this very bar right here is set up in archer. When I become a bard, it goes away, and it becomes my normal set of hotbars. Let's switch to a healer again. I like this particular setup. So, how did we accomplish this? You know, before we actually go there, let's talk about how to set up this hotbar itself. One that can expand and retract like this, we make using macros. So we have commands that expand and retract right here. So the expand feature copies this hotbar, which is number 4. And by the way, if you want to know what your hotbars are, there are ways to do that. You can display hotbar numbers, which shows them. And you can also go into here, and each hotbar should have a number on it. So hotbar 4. Alright, so the expand feature, this macro I've made, will copy hotbar archer 2 into share 4. It will share that archer's hotbar number 2 as hotbar number 4, the shared hotbar. So what does that do? You press the button, this hotbar becomes a copy of what is in archer number 2. So let's go to archer number 2. Archer number 2 is right there, and it's the familiar looking hotbar we have. And you can see we did similar things on each of these. Hotbar display number 6, which is this hotbar right here. So when I press the tank button, it displays this hotbar, and it copies from archer 9 to number 6. I think you can kind of imagine what I've done there. I basically copied this concept and used it for every single one of these buttons. And you can actually do this for more than one class. So I have Warrior open right now. Marauder, I've hidden some more buttons on. See, these look kind of familiar. You can actually do this with as many jobs you have unlocked. You can use as many of the hotbars that come from those classes as you want. We should probably have gone through this a little bit earlier, but if you have hotbars that you don't want to change when you switch to different classes, you can put those as shared hotbars. So, for instance, this hotbar right here does not matter what class I'm playing. This right here is going to stay the same, and that is number 4. So if we go into here, we should see hotbar 4 is a shared hotbar, which just means it doesn't change. Shared between all classes. So I've shown you how to make a hotbar into something that's a little more interesting, has some potential. This also means, however, because these hotbars are saved on another class, if I was to remove this raid marker and take it away, it comes back whenever I do this, because this isn't actually the hotbar as it shows. The hotbar exists in Archer 2. So I can move any of this, doesn't matter. And it just comes right back. This also means that in order to add or change anything from this, you actually need to go back to Archer, remove the soul stone and then change it here, because this is what is actually taking place. Alright, so let's put our soul crystal back on. So, we talked about this a little bit before. I have this set up to where it will show and hide these hotbars with a click of the sheath button. When I hide it, it brings up the cross hotbar. If you decide to use this because you want even more hotbars, because you're completely addicted more and more, you can go in here and enable crossbar. And this also would be inverse if you're playing on console. So if you can actually add hotbars that look like PC hotbars and use them in a similar way. But for a PC player, enabling cross hotbar allows you to have a new set. Just hear that? That's the hunt link shell alerting me that somebody just said something in the hunt. So we have down here a very similar setup to this. This button is a macro. This simply changes the cross hotbar to number 1. This is cross hotbar number 1. So let's look at one of these. Mounts. The mount one is a cross hotbar macro. Once again, macro icon, changing what it is that you want for the icon. And cross hotbar changed to number 5. So this setup right here is cross hotbar number 5. And you can just simply drag whatever you want to it. Go back, and this will always take us there. You can use it to set up even more buttons. That way you can have your logs, whatever you want, really quickly. Things you use a whole lot. So I have things like mounts, minions, chocobo actions for your companion, repair, party finder, anything you need. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about concepts when setting up your UI. You may notice that I don't usually have this up. And the reason is because what these are here for is just as a placeholder for key bindings. I generally speaking don't need to look down here because I have all these key bindings memorized. I know that Shift R is always going to be galvanize. I don't need to look down here to actually see that. And galvanize does not have, or it's not galvanize, it's ad loquium. Galvanize is the shield effect. I don't need to know anything about that because I know the keybind and it has no cooldown. So the only thing that really needs to be seen once you have all your keybinds memorized is things that have a cooldown. So that's what these are right here. They're big, bold buttons hidden over my UI, right towards the center. That are things that I'm going to need to be hitting often, and I'm going to need to know when they're up. So that's why I have all of these set up in the middle. Each class kind of has theirs set up differently. See, tanking and DPS has a slightly different UI setup. And the reason it's different is because I don't necessarily need to see everything going on in my party as a tank. But I do want to, for instance, notice about my enemy list. I want to be able to know about my enemy list really quickly, to make sure I still have threat. And just like that, it's easier to see. I also have cooldown set up over here, similar to what I have in my healers, but there's also something else I've got here. Which, these are not cooldowns, these are the combo actions. This allows me to know, at a glance, at what stage the combo is at, should something happen and I lose track. Or maybe it's too noisy, I can't tell if it hit or not. You can have these set up for whatever combos you want. Just kind of something that allows you to have a little bit more visual information without actually having everything down here on your hotbars, because this can take up a lot of space. That allows you to have what's truly a heads-up display. All of your relevant information that you really need to know is right here in the center. You don't need to be looking down at the corners or anywhere else to get all the information that you need while you're actually playing. Very helpful. That covers most of the ideas we have in terms of UI setup. I will eventually be going into, in another video, all of the subtleties of making macros, because there's a lot that goes into it. We just kind of touched on some basic stuff that allows us to make UI macros today. Let's go over a few just of the, as an endpoint, some of the little things I found out over time. In your friends list, you can assign friend groups. And your friend groups can have a symbol by them. So, for instance, Sophia right here, my wife, have a little heart by it. Not a big deal, but it is kind of cool. For new people, you may want your inventory to be a little bigger, to show more, like this, that shows the full inventory. I like it like that. That is right here under Expanded. Open all. Under character music in the sound settings, character configuration, you can take off the battle music, which I have off because I get a little tired of hearing it every single time I enter battle. You can take the mount music off so it doesn't play, and you can even change it to where, when you're in residential areas, the background music matches the city state. So the goblet, where we're in right now, matches with Ul'dah, because it's the residential district of Ul'dah. So here it will play Ul'dah's music instead of the residential music, which I prefer. Last thing I want to go over is nameplates. Here in character configuration, display name settings, you can change the settings for every nameplate in the game. So we have Shay right here. Shay's is orange because he is on my friends list. And friends, I have them to be always visual, always showing. What I have set up for other people, oops, wrong menu. For others, if you are not a party member, you're not my alliance, you're not my friend, I only have your nameplate triggered and showing when I have you targeted. So when you're in an environment with a lot of people, this can really clean up your UI. So we're in Limsa Lominsa with tons of people all over the place, and instead of having tons and tons of nameplates, I get to watch people ERPing without their nameplates being in the way. Because Limsa Lominsa, where that's always happens. Makes it a little cleaner. In addition to that, you can change your enemies, your chocobo companion, and your pets to have different colors and different display settings when their HP bars show or not. Just whatever you want to your liking. Alright, that pretty much does it for today. Thanks for watching, and anything else you need help with, you can contact me in-game. I'm pretty obsessive about my UI, so if I don't know the answer, I'm sure I can find it. Take care.